This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
Hey guys, Dylan here from beautiful Pinole, California, right on the San Pablo Bay. Hey Nomads, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dylan Callier. Today we are talking about my first contract negotiation. I'm super excited to bring this information to you. I'll be honest, I was wanting to record this a while back, but was not able to do so. So today I'm going to be talking about what I did to prepare for my first ever contract negotiation, and then also a couple things that I learned from it. So I'll begin with the general experience of a contract negotiation, and then I'll be able to go into how I was able to kind of ask questions, get the information that I wanted, and also ultimately come out with a good contract at the end. So when you decide to submit with a company, you go through the interview process, then you go to the contract. Usually there's 2 types of contract submittals. You can either verbally commit or you can sign a contract. Both of these are some form of commitment. So if you do either, you should follow through with that. A verbal commitment, not all companies go off of them, but a lot of them do. A verbal commitment a lot of times gets the ball rolling to where they're starting to work on insurances, to where they're starting to do deals between the businesses. And if you verbally commit and say back out, this can put the business kind of in a spot that's kind of tough. So if you verbally commit, you should treat it as a written committal, but it is not a written committal. So if anything pops up, you can then talk with your recruiter and go into maybe a negotiation or something popped up and like bring that forward if there was so happened to be a red flag. But this should be an absolutely last resort. Some companies want you to kind of give a verbal committal before you take the interview as a kind of a committal of what the pay package would be. That's not necessarily, again, not a written committal, but what I did for my first one was had the pay package presented to me. I then took the interview, and then I had all the numbers in my head, and then after that I was able to go forward and kind of negotiate a little bit to get what I wanted out of that deal, out of that contract. So took the interview process, then jumped in, and then went to the contract negotiation. Things that helped me in order for contract negotiation was having a general idea of what minimal I would take for that area. So I had a hard minimum of what I wanted to take for a contract. That also helped screen out a lot of the job submittals that some recruiters were trying to put me in. If it was too low, I stayed hard with that. With this case, it was presented to me in a way that was actually $10 less than what I wanted. But because I had a hard line, a hard no, I did not budge. I said, this is going to be the minimum. And then we were able to go forward from there, and the take-home pay was raised. Looking at a contract, you know what the pay package is, and then usually most companies will have their own type of standard form. Each form will be different between companies. Some are easier to read, some are very lengthy. But you definitely want to go through and kind of read everything and see what is inside of that contract. Most of the contracts, they will have a little box that allows them to type in the variability that comes with each contract. So your pay, your days off, anything, maybe some special requests, options of that nature. And so you go through, you get this contract, they send it to you. By this point, I had already verbally committed to get the ball rolling, but it was understood that I was going to read through the contract, come forward with any questions, and then have the ultimate signing, which I think is the best way to go about it. Some people will recommend that you don't verbally commit and you only go with the written committal, and that is fine, but a lot of the companies out there, they don't necessarily operate in that fashion, so you can kind of limit yourself if you do so. For reading the contract, something that I wish I would have done was be a little bit more organized with the dates that I needed off during that contract. Because what ended up happening is I came forward with some dates that I needed off, and then I got the okay for that. But because I did it after the interview, the recruiter had to go forward and ask for those dates off. And it was just kind of a little bit of back and forth that I felt could have been a little bit more efficient if I would have known those dates ahead of time. So before you go through the process of getting the interview, know the dates that the contract is going to run and know the dates that you're going to need off. That way the recruiter doesn't have to keep going back and forth in order to make sure that those dates are available for you. Especially if you're needing weekends off, things like that. As a physical therapist, the weekends off isn't that important, or it is important, but in most physical therapy settings, you're not going to be working a lot of weekends, especially in outpatient. But you want to make sure that is the case so that if you need weekends off, you ask for weekends off. Don't forget about that. That's very important. But for nurses or for sonographers or other professions out there, you definitely want to pay attention to the weekends if you have to work, and then also just know your dates ahead of time that you are going to ask off. Things that I learned going through, I was able to have a little bit more variability with this contract. So I was most worried about getting started in a outpatient facility that had a very high productivity rating. So in this contract, I asked for a number of patient visits per week that I was going to max at. Now, I understood going into this that this was not going to be like something that's going to really uphold me within the clinic, but it did give me an extra leg to stand on. So if I found myself in a position where I felt like I was seeing too many patients, that I felt like I was being put in a hard position, that I could use this as some sort of stability during the contract. The other thing that helped me is that after a verbal committal of reading this contract, verbal committal, and then you read the contract, you want to be timely with everything. Much like everything else within the traveling world, you want to be quick, because if you're not, like if you were quick with your recruiter is going to be quick with you, and everything just moves seamlessly. For this one, after the contract was signed, there was a lot of paperwork involved. Luckily, I had this one, I accepted this one almost 2 months in advance before my start date, which is unheard of. Thankfully, my recruiter hustled really hard and got me this for sure type of contract, but it almost took me a full 2 months in order to get all this paperwork done. And that wasn't on the recruiter's side or the recruitment agency. That was on the particular clinic that I was working for. So they basically ran me through the normal hiring process for a permanent individual, and it took a lot of time. So because I was able to quickly turn around from verbal committal to a signed written contract, that we were able to move forward and get all that done within the amount of time that I needed to get it done. Something that turned out to be good in my favor, even though I signed out 2 months in advance, I was going under the impression I had read online that around $20 to $22 per hour for taxable was the accepted amount and should be the amount that you earn as a traveler. The recruiter I was working with actually said that, no, you can actually go lower than that. We can go about 18 per hour, but I wasn't quite comfortable with that, so I stuck at 20. later on, about 6 weeks later, before I started my first day as a traveler, I watched a YouTube online. I reached out to a tax professional and they said, yes, actually, if you go down to 18 an hour, that is okay. So I asked my recruiter, even though I'd already signed, if we could go down to an $18 taxable, which would allow me $2 extra per hour that wasn't taxed and earn me a little bit of extra cash that way. I think overall it probably brought me up about $40 per week. He said yes. And so even if you think it's too late in a contract, go ahead and ask for it. The worst I can do is say no, and you're in the exact same position. So I almost didn't ask because I figured, oh, I already signed it. Like, they're not going to change it. So he could have very well said, no, actually, we already wrote it. Everything's gone through. It's kind of finalized at this point. We can't do anything. Sorry. But he went through and he allowed me to kind of change it just a little bit, signed a new piece on the paper, and then sent it in, and now I got a little bit of extra cash. So be sure to ask questions. Be sure to ask for whatever you want. Aim for the stars, and you'll land on the moon. Let somebody else shoot you down. Don't shoot yourself down first. And that was probably the biggest thing that I learned on that first contract was ask, because you can only go down from where you're asking. Don't sell yourself short, because then you're going to stick in this range. You want to keep going up. So the big mistake that I made with this one was I misread the contract. I misread the start of my insurance date to where I thought it was 30 days after the first of the month. Well, I thought it was 30 days after I first started. That was not correct. It was actually 30 days after the first of the month that I work. So because I started early in the month, I went almost a full month without insurance there, or without insurance. I still had insurance, but I'll tell you how I did that. I went almost a full month without being covered by the travel agency, and then my 30 days didn't start until the first of that following month. So I had 2 months that I thought I was going to be covered for health insurance that ended up not being covered. And that was completely my fault. I misread it. So when asking for contract and talking about insurance, if you're taking the travel agency's insurance, be clear, ask for when that start date is for your insurance coverage. What I ended up having to do, coming from my permanent position, they offered me COBRA, which is a retroactive insurance. In Missouri, you have 50 to 60 days to opt in. Luckily, it was still within those 50 to 60 days when I realized that I was not going to be covered by the insurance of that travel agency until a month down the road. So I opted in. It was very expensive. It was about $700 per month. And that depends. What COBRA does is basically continues your previous employment's health insurance. So, but instead of you paying your own portion, you're now paying the company's portion as well. They're part of the benefit. And so it went up about $700 a month for me. So I had to pay 2 months of that until I was covered by the travel agency. But that was probably the biggest mistake that I made on this first contract, was misreading that part. And I think the way that you avoid that is asking for the specific start date. So in general, keep organized with all the dates. Know if you're going to be working weekends. Know if you have days that you need off. Know when the contract starts and when it ends. And then also know when the insurance agency starts. And then again, recapping, be sure to ask for anything that you want in the contract. Let them tell you no. And then keep up with the podcast, keep up with other blogs about what is acceptable for contracts. If you start getting maybe a little fishy feeling, reach out to the community. Now, I will say the questions that you see online of, is this a good bill rate, is very variable to where you're at and to what time of the year that you're posting. or what year that you are posting, depending on which profession you're in. Nursing is their market is it fluctuates a lot. It's up and down. Therapy is pretty steady, but they are all a market. So at certain points you can hit it and can be very high for bill rates and you get a better contract. At certain points you can hit it and it'll be very low, and then you'll also get a low bill rate. But those are my key tips for contract negotiations. If you guys are looking for the next episode of the podcast, I officially launched them on the New Medical Nomads podcast page on Facebook. If you have any questions, be sure to join the New Medical Nomads group. This is actually a live podcast, so you get the first access to these podcasts when you are in the New Medical Nomads group. Also, any type of commenting, liking, share is going to ultimately help us get this information out to the people that we are wanting to reach. So if you enjoy this, please tag somebody below. If you learned something, please like up the page, and I would greatly appreciate it. If you have any more questions, be sure to hit me up, tag me anything, and then everybody have safe travels.